Days that followed the ritual were quiet, almost surreal. The Valith worked tirelessly to repair what they could of their damaged world, tending to the forests, rivers, and fields that had suffered under the mining operations. Though the moon was healed and the immediate threat had passed, the scars left behind would take years if not decades to fully mend. Jack stayed with Naira and her people during this time, lending a hand wherever he could. He helped clear debris from collapsed tunnels, carried supplies to remote villages, and even assisted in rebuilding homes destroyed by the environmental collapse. At first, Jack felt out of place among the Valith. Their customs were foreign to him, their connection to nature something he struggled to understand. But as he spent more time with them, he began to see the beauty in their way of life, their respect for the land, their sense of community, and their unwavering hope for the future. Slowly but surely, he started to feel like he belonged, even if only for a little while. NYARA2 seemed different after the ritual. Her glowing patterns were dimmer now, her movements slower and more deliberate. She still smiled often, though there was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Jack noticed it every time they spoke, and though she insisted she was fine, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jack found Nira sitting alone near the edge of a newly restored river. She was staring at the water, her expression thoughtful. "Hey," Jack said softly, approaching her cautiously. "Mind if I join you?" Naira glanced up, smiling faintly. Of course not. Jack sat down beside her, pulling his knees to his chest. For a moment, neither of them spoke, content to listen to the gentle flow of the river and the distant calls of birds returning to the forest. Finally, Jack broke the silence. "You've been quiet lately," he said, glancing at her. "Everything." "Okay?" Naira hesitated, then nodded. "I'm just tired. The ritual took more out of me than I expected." Jack frowned, concern etched on his face. "Are you going to be all right? I mean, really all right?" "I will be," Naira replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "It's just going to take time." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You know, you don't have to do everything yourself. You've got your people and me. We're here for you." Naira's lips curved into a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Jack. That means a lot." There was another long pause before Jack spoke again, his tone hesitant. "So, what happens now? For you, I mean, and for your world?" Naira looked out over the river, her gaze distant. "We rebuild. It won't be easy, but we have hope. Again, the moon is stable, and the land is healing. With time, our world will thrive once more." "And what about Astro Mining Consortium?" Jack asked, his voice hardening. "They're not just going to pack up and leave, are they?" "No," Naira admitted, "but they'll think twice before coming back. The artifact showed them we're not defenseless. And if they try again—" She trailed off, her glowing patterns flickering faintly. "We'll be ready," Jack nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. He knew corporations like Astro Mining didn't give up easily. Still, he trusted Naira and her people to handle whatever came next. They had proven themselves stronger than anyone, including him, had anticipated. A few days later, Jack stood in the cockpit of the Horizon, preparing for departure. His duffel bag was packed, and the ship's engines hummed softly, ready to lift off at a moment's notice. He had debated staying longer, helping the Valith with their recovery efforts, but deep down, he knew it was time to move on. This wasn't his world, no matter how much he had grown to care about it. NYARA joined him in the cockpit, carrying a small pouch in her hands. "I wanted to give you this," she said, holding it out to him. Inside was a fragment of the artifact. Tiny shard no bigger than a fingernail, glowing faintly in the dim light. "What's this for?" Jack asked, frowning as he accepted it. "It's a token of gratitude," Naira explained. "A reminder of what we accomplished together." Jack chuckled dryly, shaking his head. "I don't need a souvenir, Naira. Helping you, it was enough." "I?" "No," Naira said, her smile warm but tinged with sadness. "But I want you to have it. If you ever need me or my people, you'll know where to find us." Jack stared at the shard, his throat tightening unexpectedly. He had spent so many years running from responsibility, avoiding attachments, and keeping people at arm's length. But Niera had changed all that. She had reminded him of the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. And now, as he prepared to leave, he realized how much he would miss her. "Take care of yourself, okay?" Jack said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Don't go doing anything reckless without me around to bail you out." Naira laughed softly, her glowing patterns brightening slightly. "I'll try. And you, don't be a stranger. Promise me that." "I promise," Jack replied, managing a small smile. "Besides, who else is going to save your world next?" "Time?" Naira rolled her eyes playfully, but there was genuine affection in her expression. "Goodbye, Jack. Goodbye, Naira." With that, Jack climbed into the pilot's seat and powered up the engines. As the horizon lifted off the ground, he glanced out the viewport one last time, watching Naira grow smaller and smaller until she disappeared from view. The planet below was beautiful, its forests lush and its skies clear. It was a world worth fighting for, a world worth saving. As he set a course for the stars, Jack felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. He didn't know where his journey would take him next, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was heading somewhere meaningful. Somewhere out there, an alien girl remembered him by his scent, and that thought gave him strength. With the completed artifact safely in hand, Jack and Naira made their way back to the horizon, moving quickly through the dense jungle. The mercenaries they had left unconscious inside the temple wouldn't stay that way for long, and reinforcements could arrive at any moment. Every step they took was cautious, every sound around them a potential threat. Despite the tension, there was a sense of triumph in the air. They had done what seemed impossible just days ago. They had retrieved all 3 pieces of the artifact, and now it glowed brightly in Naira's hands, pulsing with an energy that seemed almost alive. Once they reached the ship, Jack wasted no time powering up the engines. The roar of the horizon cutting through the atmosphere echoed across the valley as they ascended into orbit. From above, Tamar looked peaceful again, its forests and rivers untouched by the chaos unfolding below. But Jack knew better than to let his guard down. Astral mining consortium ships were already converging on the planet, their sensors likely picking up traces of the artifact's energy. "We're not out of this yet," Jack said, glancing at Naira as he plotted a course away from the incoming fleet. "They'll be after us the second they realize we've got the artifact." Naira nodded, her expression serious but determined. "We have to get back to Aris. The artifact can stabilize the moon if we use it properly." "Stabilize?" Jack echoed, raising an eyebrow. "You mean, like, fix everything?" "Yes," Naira replied. "It's tied to the moon's core. If we channel its energy correctly, we can heal the damage and drive the humans away." Jack let out a low whistle. "That's quite a plan. Any chance you forgot to mention something else? Like, I don't know, a giant space monster guarding the moon or something?" Naira gave him a small smile, though her eyes remained focused. "No monsters, just us and the artifact." "Well, that's comforting," Jack muttered sarcastically. He adjusted the controls, weaving through asteroid fields and debris clouds to lose their pursuers. For now they were safe, but he knew it wouldn't last. Sooner or later, the mercenaries would catch up, and when they did, things would get ugly. Hours passed as they traveled toward Aris, the tension in the cockpit thick enough to cut with a knife. Jack kept one eye on the radar, watching for signs of pursuit, while Naira sat quietly beside him, cradling the artifact. Its glow illuminated her face, casting soft shadows that made her look almost otherworldly. Jack couldn't help but steal glances at her, marveling at how much she had changed since they first met. She wasn't just some mysterious alien girl anymore. She was a fighter, Someone who refused to give up even when the odds were stacked against her. You really think this is going to work? Jack asked finally, breaking the silence. Using the artifact to fix your moon, I mean, it sounds great, but is it really that simple? It's complicated, Naira admitted, her voice thoughtful. The artifact has immense power, but it's also unpredictable. My people have used it before, but never in such dire circumstances. There's always a risk. A risk? Jack echoed, his tone sharp. What kind of risk are we talking about here? Explosions? Implosions? Turning the entire moon into a giant laser beam? Naira chuckled softly, shaking her head. Nothing so dramatic. But if we make a mistake, the artifact could destabilize further, making the situation worse. Jack groaned, rubbing his temples. Of course it could. Why does nothing ever go smoothly? Despite his frustration, Jack couldn't deny that he felt a strange sense of purpose. For years, he had drifted from job to job, avoiding responsibility and trying to outrun his past. But now, helping Naira felt different. It wasn't just about survival, it was about doing something meaningful, something that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, it was about proving to himself that he still had what it took to make a difference. When they finally arrived at Eris, the sight of the dying moon filled Jack with dread. Massive fissures crisscrossed its surface, glowing, faintly with molten energy leaking from within. The mining rigs continued their relentless work, tearing deeper into the crust, oblivious to the destruction they were causing. Below, on the planet itself, the once vibrant forests and rivers were fading, replaced by barren wastelands and polluted skies. This is bad, Jack murmured, staring at the devastation. Really bad. Naira nodded, her glowing patterns dimming. As if reflecting her sorrow, we need to act quickly. Once the moon collapses, it will disrupt the balance of our world forever. All right, Jack said, gripping the controls tightly. Tell me where to land. We'll figure out the rest once we're down there. Naira directed him to a secluded area near the base of a mountain, far from the mining operations. As soon as the ship touched down, they gathered their supplies and set off toward the heart of the Valith Enclave, a hidden sanctuary, where the remnants of Naira's people had taken refuge. Along the way, they encountered signs of the environmental collapse, dead trees, dried-up rivers, and eerie silence where wildlife should have thrived. When they reached the enclave, they were greeted by Elder Kale, a frail but wise-looking man. With glowing patterns similar to Naira's, his eyes widened in awe when he saw the artifact in her hands. You've done it, Kale said, his voice trembling with emotion. You've brought hope back to our people. Naira bowed her head respectfully. We still have much to do. The artifact must be activated, and the moon must be healed. Kale nodded gravely. Come, let us prepare. Inside the enclave, the remaining members of the Valith gathered in a large chamber adorned with carvings and symbols identical to those on the artifact. The air hummed with anticipation as Naira stepped forward, holding the artifact aloft. Jack stood nearby, feeling out of place but unwilling to leave her side. Whatever happened next, he wanted to be there. The artifact is a gift from our ancestors, Kale explained to the crowd. But it demands sacrifice. To heal the moon, we must connect ourselves to its energy, to share our strength with the land. Jack frowned, turning to Naira. Sacrifice. What does that mean exactly? Naira hesitated, then met his gaze steadily. It means giving part of ourselves to the artifact. Our life force, our connection to the world it will fuel. The healing process. Jack's stomach sank. And what happens to you? To everyone who does this. They will survive, Naira assured him. But it will weaken them. For some, it may take years to recover. And for others? Jack pressed, his voice tight. Others? Naira trailed off, her expression solemn. It may be too much. Jack clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. You didn't tell me this part. You're putting yourself and your people at risk. Is this really worth it? It has to be, Naira replied firmly. If we don't try, we lose everything. Before Jack could argue further, Ko raised, his hands signaling for silence. Let us begin. Naira turned to face the artifact, placing her hands on its surface. The glow intensified, spreading outward until it enveloped the entire chamber. One by one, the Veileth joined her, forming a circle around the artifact. Their glowing patterns merged with its light, creating a dazzling display of color and energy. Jack watched from the sidelines, helpless to intervene. He wanted to stop them, to find another way, but deep down, he knew there wasn't one. This was their fight, their choice. All he could do was stand by and support them. As the ritual reached its peak, the ground trembled violently. Above them, the moon began to shift, its cracks sealing themselves as new layers of rock formed. The molten energy receded, replaced by a steady, calming glow. Slowly but surely, the balance was being restored. When it was over, the room fell silent. Exhausted but triumphant, the Veileth collapsed to the floor, their patterns dim but still present. Naira remained standing, though barely, clutching the artifact tightly. We did it, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. We saved our world! Jack stepped forward, steadying her as she swayed unsteadily. You did it, he corrected gently. I just helped a little. Naira smiled weakly, leaning into him for support. Thank you, Jack, for everything. Outside, the sky had cleared, revealing stars shining brightly overhead. The moon hung above them, whole and radiant once more. Jack exhaled deeply, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. End of Part 6. After escaping the mercenaries on the moon, Jack and Naira spent the next few hours regrouping aboard the Horizon. The adrenaline from their narrow escape was still coursing through their veins, but now that they were safe at least for the moment, they could focus on what came next. Jack sat in the cockpit, staring at the glowing shard of crystal resting on the console. Its faint light pulsed rhythmically, almost like it had a heartbeat. So, Jack said finally, breaking the silence, where's the last piece? Naira unfolded her map again, spreading it across the dashboard. Her fingers traced a path to a location marked by 3 intersecting lines. It's here, she explained, pointing to a small island surrounded by deep blue water. This is Tamar, one of our sacred sanctuaries. The final piece is hidden in an ancient temple beneath the surface. Jack leaned closer, squinting at the map. Looks peaceful enough. No mining rigs or mercenaries tearing it apart. Not yet, Naira replied, her voice tinged with worry. But the humans know about Tamar. They've been searching for the artifact there for months. If we don't get to it first, they will. Jack nodded, his expression grim. He didn't need to ask why this piece was so important. The stakes were clear. Without all 3 shards, the artifact couldn't be completed, and without the artifact, Naira's people wouldn't stand a chance against the invaders. Still, something about the idea of heading straight into another dangerous mission made him uneasy. They had barely survived the last one. How long until we reach Tamar? He asked, leaning back in his seat. A day, maybe less if we push the engines, Naira answered. But we'll need to stay hidden. Astral Mining Consortium ships patrol the area constantly. Of course they do, Jack muttered under his breath. Why would anything ever be easy? Naira gave him a small smile. Nothing worth fighting forever is. Jack chuckled dryly but didn't argue. She had a point, though. He wasn't sure he liked hearing it. Instead, he focused on plotting their course, weaving through asteroid fields and uncharted sectors to avoid detection. For the rest of the journey, they took turns keeping watch, ensuring no enemy ships were following them. When they arrived at Tamar, the sight of the planet below took Jack's breath away. It was unlike anything he'd seen before, a lush paradise covered in dense forests, shimmering lakes, and towering mountains. The air seemed cleaner somehow, even from orbit, and the colors were vivid and vibrant. But despite its beauty, there was an underlying tension in the atmosphere. Scattered across the skies were small fleets of ships, their angular designs unmistakably belonging to the Astral Mining Consortium. "They're already here," Nyera whispered, her voice heavy with dread. "We'll have to land carefully." Jack nodded, scanning the terrain for a safe spot to set down. He chose a secluded valley surrounded by thick trees, far from the main landing zones where the mercenaries had established their bases. As the horizon descended, Jack kept his eyes glued to the radar, ready to abort the landing at the first sign of trouble. Once the ship touched down, they donned their breathing masks again and stepped outside. The air smelled sweet, like flowers, mixed with rain, and the ground was soft beneath their boots. Birds or creatures that looked like birds flitted between the branches overhead, their calls echoing through the forest. "It's beautiful," Jack admitted reluctantly, looking around. "Almost makes you forget why we're here." Nyera nodded, though her expression remained serious. "Come on, we don't have much time." They followed the map deeper into the forest, navigating winding paths and climbing over fallen logs. The further they went, the quieter the jungle became, as if nature itself knew they were approaching something sacred. Eventually, they reached a clearing where the trees parted to reveal a massive stone structure half buried in the earth. Vines clung to its weathered surface, and moss grew thickly along its edges, giving it an ancient, timeless appearance. "This is it," Nyera said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The temple," Jack whistled softly, impressed despite himself. "Your people really know how to build stuff." "The temple has stood for thousands of years," Nyera explained. "It protects the last piece of the artifact." "Well, let's hope it does its job," Jack replied, stepping cautiously toward the entrance. The doorway was tall and wide, carved with intricate patterns similar to the ones on Nyera's skin. As they crossed the threshold, the air inside felt cooler, heavier, as if the space itself was alive. The interior of the temple was dimly lit by glowing crystals embedded in the walls. The floor sloped downward gently, leading them into a series of chambers connected by narrow corridors. Along the way, they encountered more traps pressure plates, collapsing floors, and dart-shooting mechanisms, but Nyera deftly disarmed each one, her movements quick and precise. "You're starting to make me feel useless," Jack joked, trying to lighten the mood. Nyara smiled briefly, but didn't respond. She was focused, her glowing patterns flickering faintly as if responding to the energy in the temple. Finally, they reached the heart of the structure, a circular chamber dominated by a pedestal identical to the one they'd found on the moon. Resting atop, it was the third and final shard of the artifact, its light pulsing in sync with the others. Nyera approached reverently, reaching out to take the shard. As soon as her fingers brushed against it, a low hum filled the room, resonating through the walls and floor. Jack instinctively backed away, unsure what was happening. "What is that?" he asked, his voice tense. "The artifact is awakening," Nyera replied, her tone awestruck. "It recognizes us." Before Jack could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor behind them. Heavy boots, weapons being drawn, the unmistakable signs of intruders. Jack cursed under his breath, grabbing his blaster. "They're here," he said, glancing at Nyera. "What do we do?" Nyera held up the shard, her expression resolute. "We finished this. Trust me." Jack hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Together, they turned to face the entrance just as a group of mercenaries burst into the chamber, weapons raised. Their leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward, sneering at them. "Hand over the artifact," he demanded, his voice cold and commanding. "Or die." Jack tightened his grip on his blaster, stepping protectively in front of Nyera. "Over my dead body," he shot back. The mercenary smirked. "That can be arranged." Before either side could act, Nyera raised the shard high above. Her head, the glow intensified, bathing the room in bright golden light. The mercenaries shielded their eyes, momentarily blinded, while Jack stared in awe as the three shards began to merge together, forming a single radiant object. "This isn't over," the mercenary leader growled, raising his weapon. But before he could fire, the artifact emitted a powerful pulse of energy that knocked everyone off their feet, including Jack and Naira. When the light faded, the mercenaries lay unconscious on the floor, their weapons rendered useless. Jack groaned, struggling to sit up. What just happened? Naira knelt beside him, clutching the completed artifact. "It protected us," she said simply. "Now we can use it to save my world." Jack shook his head, still trying to process. "Everything. You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Naira smiled faintly, her glowing patterns brighter than ever. "Let's go home." As the horizon approached the moon, Jack slowed the ship to a crawl, scanning the area carefully. The surface was covered in massive craters and scars from the mining operations. Enormous drills churned through the ground, tearing apart the moons crust, while transport ships ferried the extracted materials back to larger vessels orbiting nearby. It was a scene of destruction, one that left Jack feeling uneasy. "They're not wasting any time," he muttered under his breath as he adjusted the ship's trajectory to avoid detection. "This place looks like it's been hit by a war." Naira nodded grimly, her glowing patterns dimming as if she were mourning the damage. "They don't care about the consequences," she said softly. "All they want is profit." Jack glanced at her, noting the sadness in her voice. He wanted to say something comforting, but words failed him. Instead, he focused on navigating the ship toward a remote section of the moon where Naira had indicated. Their first objective lay hidden. According to the map, the artifact piece they needed was buried deep underground, protected by layers of rock and ancient traps designed to keep intruders out. "We'll need to land near the northern ridge," Naira said, pointing to a jagged line of cliffs on the map. "From there, we can access the tunnels leading to the artifact." "Tunnels?" Jack echoed, raising an eyebrow. "You mean caves?" "Yes," Naira replied, "but they're unstable. The miners' machines have weakened the structure. We'll have to be careful." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Great. Just what I signed up for crawling through collapsing caves." "It's the only way," Naira insisted. "If we don't retrieve the artifact, my people won't stand a chance." Jack didn't argue. He knew she was right, even if the thought of venturing into those tunnels made his stomach churn. After finding a secluded spot to land, he powered down the engines and grabbed a small pack containing basic supplies, a flashlight, some rope, and a few tools. Naira followed suit, slipping a slender dagger into her belt before joining him at the hatch. The air outside was thin and cold, forcing them to wear breathing masks connected to portable oxygen tanks. Jack zipped up his jacket against the biting wind as they trudged across the rocky terrain. The ground beneath their feet felt brittle, like it might give way at any moment. Every step was cautious, deliberate, as they made their way toward the cliffs. When they reached the entrance to the cruiser, cautious, deliberate, as they made their way toward the cliffs. Tunnels. Jack paused, shining his flashlight into the darkness. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through side by side. Beyond it, the tunnel sloped downward sharply, disappearing into shadows. "This doesn't look safe," Jack said, frowning. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Naira nodded confidently. "Yes, the artifact is inside. Trust me." Jack hesitated, then shrugged. "All right, let's go. But if the ceiling starts falling, don't blame me when I run faster than you." Naira smiled faintly, though her expression remained serious. "Stay close," she warned. "The tunnels are booby-trapped." Jack rolled his eyes but didn't argue. Together, they stepped into the darkness, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The walls of the tunnel were smooth, almost unnaturally so, and etched with strange symbols that glowed faintly in response to their presence. Jack couldn't help but feel like they were being watched, though he told himself it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. After several minutes of walking, they came to a fork in the path. One tunnel led steeply downward, while the other curved gently to the left. Naira knelt beside the symbols carved into the wall, studying them closely. "The artifact is down below," she said after a moment. "But there's a trap ahead. We'll need to move carefully." "Of course there's a trap," Jack muttered sarcastically. "Because why wouldn't there be?" Ignoring his comment, Naira stood and gestured for him to follow. They proceeded slowly, testing each step before putting their full weight on it. At one point, the floor beneath Jack's boots shifted slightly, causing him to freeze mid-stride. A low rumble echoed through the tunnel as dust rained down from above. "What did I tell you?" Jack whispered, his voice tense. "Traps everywhere." Naira pressed a finger to her lips, signaling for silence. She crouched down and examined the mechanism embedded in the floor. With quick, precise movements, she disarmed it using her dagger. The rumbling stopped, and the tension in the air eased slightly. "Okay," Jack admitted grudgingly. "You're good at this." Naira smirked but didn't respond. They continued onward, the tunnel growing narrower and darker with every step. Finally, they reached a large chamber at the end of the path. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, atop which rested a glowing shard of crystal, the second piece of the artifact. "There it is." Naira breathed, her voice filled with awe. Before they could celebrate, however, the ground began to shake violently. Dust and rocks tumbled from the ceiling as the sound of distant explosions echoed through the chamber. Jack grabbed Naira's arm, pulling her toward the exit. "What's happening?" he shouted over the noise. "The miners!" Naira yelled back. "They must have detected us." Jack cursed under his breath, urging her to move faster. Behind them, the tunnel collapsed in a shower of debris, blocking their escape route. Without hesitation, Naira turned to face the wall, pressing her hands against the glowing symbols. The markings flared brightly, and a hidden door slid open, revealing another passageway. "This way!" she called, darting through the opening. Jack followed, clutching the shard tightly in his hand. The new tunnel was steep and uneven, forcing them to climb upward at an awkward angle. Above them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder: shouts, footsteps, and the hum of energy weapons charging. Whoever was chasing them wasn't far behind. "We're not going to make it," Jack panted, struggling to keep up. Double quotes, "Yes, we will," Naira replied firmly. "Keep moving." Finally, they emerged into daylight, gasping for breath as they scrambled onto the surface. Behind them, a group of mercenaries appeared at the tunnel entrance, armed and ready to fire. Jack quickly pulled out his blaster, firing. A few shots to buy them time. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing Naira's hand. They sprinted across the rocky landscape, dodging blasts of energy as they made their way back to the horizon. The ship was still intact, thank goodness, and Jack wasted no time climbing aboard and powering up the engines. As bullets ricocheted off the hull, he yanked the controls, sending the ship soaring into the sky just as the mercenaries reached the landing site. Once they were safely in orbit, Jack slumped back in his seat, letting out a shaky laugh. "Well," he said, glancing at Naira, "that was fun." Naira managed a weak smile, holding up the shard triumphantly. "We did it. Now we just need the last piece." Jack groaned, rubbing his temples. "Of course, because one life-threatening mission per day isn't enough." Despite his sarcasm, there was a spark of determination in his eyes. They had faced danger together and come out alive. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Jack knew they could handle them as long as they stuck together. The next morning, Jack stood in the cockpit of the Horizon, his old but reliable freighter. The ship wasn't much to look at. Its paint was chipped, and the interior smelled faintly of oil and burnt coffee, but it had gotten him through countless dangerous missions. Now it would carry him and Naira to her homeworld, Aris, a place he'd never heard of before yesterday. As he powered up the engines, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and dread. This wasn't just another delivery job. It was something far bigger and far riskier. Naira entered the cockpit, holding a rolled-up map in one hand. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with nervousness. Jack glanced over his shoulder, raising an eyebrow. "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied. "But let's get one thing straight. I'm not flying blind. You're going to tell me everything you know about this route starting now." Naira nodded and spread the map out on the console between them. It was made of some kind of thin, flexible material that shimmered faintly under the cabin lights. Lines and symbols were etched onto its surface, glowing softly like the patterns on her skin. "This is the safest path to Aris," she explained, tracing a winding route with her finger. "We'll need to avoid the main trade lanes. They're heavily patrolled by Astral Mining Consortium ships." "Great," Jack muttered, leaning closer to study the map. "So we're sneaking through uncharted territory, just what I always wanted." "It's the only way," Naira said firmly. "If they catch us, they'll know why we're coming. And then it will be too late." Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. He knew she was right, but that didn't make the situation any less stressful. Still, there was no turning back now. They had agreed to work together, and Jack prided himself on seeing things through even when they got messy. As the horizon lifted off from the spaceport and broke free of the planet's atmosphere, Jack set a course for the first checkpoint on Naira's map. The journey ahead would take several days, giving them plenty of time to plan their next move. For now, though, Jack focused on navigating the ship through a dense asteroid field, dodging rocks and debris with practiced ease. Hours passed, and the silence in the cockpit grew heavy. Jack kept his eyes on the controls, occasionally glancing at the radar to ensure they weren't being followed. Naira sat quietly beside him, her gaze fixed on the stars outside the viewport. Finally, unable to stand the quiet any longer, Jack spoke. "So," he began, keeping his tone casual, "tell me more about your people. You mentioned you're connected to nature. What does that mean exactly?" Naira turned to face him, her glowing patterns dimming slightly, as if she were calming herself. "The Valith believe that all living things are linked," she explained. "Our bodies resonate with the energy of our world, the trees, the rivers, even the air we breathe. That connection allows us to sense changes in our environment, to understand the needs of the land." Jack raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Sounds complicated." "It is," Naira admitted with a small smile. "But it also gives us strength. When the moon began to weaken, many of us felt it immediately. We tried to warn the others, but not everyone listened. Some thought it was just a natural cycle, nothing to worry about. And then the humans showed up." Jack guessed. Nyara nodded, her expression darkening. "They came disguised as explorers, promising wealth and prosperity. At first, my people welcomed them, hoping they might bring new opportunities. But soon, their true intentions became clear. They started digging into the moon, ignoring our warnings about the consequences." Jack frowned, gripping the controls tighter. "And now your world's falling apart because of it?" "Yes," Naira said softly. "If we don't stop them, the moon will collapse and our planet will follow." There was a long pause as Jack absorbed her words. He wanted to ask more questions, to fully understand the scope of the disaster looming over Aris, but instead, he found himself saying something else entirely. "You really think fate brought us together?" he asked, his tone skeptical but curious. Naira hesitated, then nodded. "I do. My people believe that every action has meaning, even if we can't see it right away. Saving me all those years ago, it wasn't just coincidence. It was part of something greater." Jack snorted, shaking his head. "Fate doesn't exist. Life's random, messy. People make choices, good or bad, and deal with the fallout." "Maybe," Naira said thoughtfully. "But sometimes those choices lead us exactly where we're meant to go." Jack didn't respond. He wasn't convinced by her talk of destiny, but he couldn't deny that something about this mission felt different. Helping Naira wasn't just about fixing someone else's problem. It was about confronting his own demons, facing the guilt and regret that had haunted him for years. Maybe that was reason enough to keep going. Over the next few days, Jack and Naira fell into a routine. During the day, they took turns piloting the ship, charting their course based on the ancient map. At night, they shared meals in the cramped galley, talking about their lives and experiences. Jack learned more about Naira's culture, their rituals, their stories, their deep respect for the natural world. In return, he told her about Earth, about the cities he'd visited, and the people he'd met along the way. One evening, as they sat side by side in the cockpit, watching a distant nebula paint the sky with swirling colors, Naira reached out and touched Jack's arm. Her hand was warm, almost electric, and for a moment, Jack felt a strange sensation ripple through him, a warmth spreading from his chest outward, like static electricity coursing through his veins. What was that? He asked, startled. Naira pulled her hand back quickly, looking embarrassed. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. Sometimes my abilities affect others unintentionally. Abilities? Jack echoed, raising an eyebrow. I can sense emotions, Naira explained. It's part of how my people communicate. Touch amplifies the connection. Jack stared at her, unsure whether to feel impressed or unnerved. So you can read minds? No, Naira said quickly. Not thoughts, just feelings. Emotions are easier to detect than words. Well, that's comforting, Jack joked, though his tone betrayed a hint of unease. He wasn't used to letting people see beneath his tough exterior. Most of the time, he preferred to keep his guard up, to hide behind sarcasm and cynicism. But Naira had a way of breaking through those walls, forcing him to confront parts of himself he'd rather forget Dot as the hours stretched into days. Jack found himself growing more comfortable around her. She wasn't judgmental or pushy. Instead, she listened patiently, offering advice only when asked. Slowly but surely, she was helping him rebuild a sense of purpose one conversation at a time. Finally, after nearly a week of travel, they reached the edge of the Eris system. Ahead of them loomed a massive moon, its surface scarred by craters and mining equipment. Even from this distance, Jack could see the damage the gaping holes carved into the terrain, the rivers of dust spilling into space. There it is, Naira whispered, her voice heavy with sorrow. Our sacred moon. Jack exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. Looks like they've been busy. We need to hurry, Naira said urgently. Every second counts. The cantina was dimly lit, filled with the low hum of conversations and the occasional clink of glasses. It wasn't a fancy place, just a small room with mismatched tables, cracked chairs, and a bar that looked like it had seen better days. But it was quiet enough for Jack and Naira to talk without being overheard. Jack slid into a booth near the back, his eyes scanning the room, as if expecting trouble to burst through the door at any moment. Naira sat across from him, her glowing patterns flickering faintly in the shadows. A waitress approached, her tablet ready to take their order. Jack waved her off, ordering a beer for himself and water for Naira. He didn't want distractions. While they talked, once the waitress left, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. All right, he said, his tone serious. Start talking. What's this about your world needing help? Naira hesitated, her hands clasped tightly. In front of her, she seemed nervous, unsure where to begin. Finally, she took a deep breath. My people, we call ourselves the Valith. We live on a planet called Eris, far from here. Our home is beautiful, full of forests and rivers, but now it is dying. Jack frowned. Dying? How? Humans came, Naira explained, her voice tinged with sadness. They brought machines to dig into our sacred moon. They are taking everything, minerals, stones, even parts of the land itself. The moon is connected to our world. If it falls, so do we. Jack rubbed the back of his neck, feeling uneasy. He'd heard stories like this before, corporations exploiting planets for resources, leaving destruction in their wake. It was a common tale in the outer reaches of the galaxy, where laws were loose and prophets ruled. Still, something about Niera's words struck a chord with him. Maybe it was the way she spoke, with such sincerity and pain. Or maybe it was the memory of Lila, reminding him of how fragile life could be. And you think I can stop them? Jack asked skeptically. I'm just a pilot, not some kind of hero. Niera shook her head. You don't understand. You saved me once. That means something to my people. To me, I believe fate brought us together again for a reason. Jack sighed, leaning back in his seat. Fate? He didn't believe in fate. Life was messy and unpredictable, and most of the time, people were just trying to survive. But Niera's conviction was hard to ignore. There was a fire in her eyes, a determination that made him wonder maybe, just maybe, she was right. Okay, he said slowly. Let's say I agree to help. What exactly am I supposed to do? Niera reached into a small pouch hanging from her belt and pulled out a crystal-like object. It was small, no bigger than a coin, and glowed faintly in her palm. This is part of an ancient artifact, she explained. It holds great power, but it is incomplete. The humans are searching for the rest of it. They think it will give them control over our moon and our world. Jack stared at the crystal, his brow furrowing. And what does this have to do with me? You must retrieve the other pieces before they do, Niera said firmly. Only then can we use the artifact to protect our moon and drive the humans away. Jack let out a bitter laugh. That sounds like a suicide mission. Even if I wanted to help, and I'm not saying I do, I wouldn't know where to start. These guys aren't amateurs. They've got weapons, ships, and probably an army of mercenaries. I know it won't be easy, Niera admitted. But you're the only one who can do it. You've been to places like this before. You know how to survive. Jack shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. Surviving isn't the same as winning. Look, I appreciate the faith you have in me, but I'm not cut out for this kind of thing anymore. I've spent years running away from problems, not charging into them. Niera's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was gentle, almost comforting. I understand why you feel that way. But running doesn't always solve anything. Sometimes you have to face your fears, to fight for something bigger than yourself. Jack looked away, avoiding her gaze. Her words hit too close to home. For years, he'd told himself that staying out of trouble was the smart choice. But deep down, he knew it wasn't true. Every job he took, every route he flew, was just another attempt to outrun the guilt that haunted him, the lives he couldn't save, the choices he regretted. Maybe Niera was right. Maybe it was time to stop running. The waitress returned with their drinks, interrupting the silence. Jack took a long sip of his beer, letting the cold liquid soothe his nerves. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, more thoughtful. Even if I agree to help, I'll need more information. Who are these people? What are they after? And where do we even start looking for the rest of this artifact? Niera nodded, glad to see him considering her request. The corporation is called Astral Mining Consortium. They've set up a base on our moon, using heavy equipment to dig deep into its core. As for the artifact, the remaining pieces are scattered across 3 locations. My people have maps that can guide us. Maps? Jack echoed, raising an eyebrow. You mean physical maps? In this day and age? They are ancient, Niera explained. Passed down through generations. They cannot be traced or hacked, which makes them safer than digital files. Jack chuckled despite himself. Old school. I like it. He paused, tapping his fingers against the side of his glass. All right, here's the deal. I'll hear. You out, and I'll think about it. But I'm not making any promises yet. Niera smiled, a small but genuine expression of relief. Thank you. That's all I ask for now. As they continued talking, Jack found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. He told Naira about his past, the jobs he'd taken, the friends he'd lost, the mistakes he wished he could undo. In return, she shared stories about her people, their connection to nature, and their belief in destiny. By the time they finished their drinks and left the cantina, Jack felt a strange sense of clarity. Helping Naira wouldn't be easy, and it might cost him everything. But for the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose. Walking back toward the hangar bay, Jack glanced at Naira out of the corner of his eye. "If we're doing this," he said, his tone firm, "we're doing it my way. No reckless moves, no unnecessary risks." "Got it?" Naira nodded, her glowing patterns brightening slightly. "Understood." Jack exhaled, shaking his head as if trying to shake off the weight of what he was about to do. "All right then," he muttered under his breath. "Let's see where this crazy journey takes us." The spaceport was alive with noise and movement, a chaotic symphony of engines roaring, voices shouting, and the clanging of metal against metal. It was a place where people from all corners of the galaxy came together, each with their own purpose. Some were traders looking to make a quick profit, others were travelers seeking adventure or escape, and a few were simply trying to survive another day. Among them stood Jack Harper, a man in his mid-30s with tired eyes and a weathered face that told the story of two. Many years spent chasing dreams that never quite came true. Jack adjusted the strap of his duffel bag over his shoulder as he made his way through the crowded hangar bay. His boots clicked against the metallic floor, blending into the cacophony around him. He wasn't paying much attention to the commotion. Instead, his mind was focused on the job ahead. Another cargo delivery, this time to a remote outpost near the edge of human-controlled territory. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and in this part of the galaxy, that was enough. As he passed by a group of mechanics huddled around a malfunctioning shuttle, something caught his eye. Standing alone near a stack of crates was a girl who didn't look like she belonged there. She was slender, with pale skin that seemed almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent lights. What drew Jack's attention, though, were the faint glowing patterns etched across her arms and neck. They pulsed softly, like bioluminescent waves, marking her as something other than human. For a moment, Jack hesitated. He'd seen plenty of aliens in his travels, but there was something about this one that felt different. She wasn't just observing the scene around her. She was watching him. Her gaze was sharp, piercing even, as if she could see right through him. Jack shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to approach her or keep walking. Before he could decide, she took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "You?" she said, her voice low and hesitant, carrying a strange accent that made her words sound almost musical. "You smell familiar." Jack blinked, caught off guard by the odd statement. "Excuse me?" he replied, glancing around to see if anyone else had heard. The last thing he needed was to draw attention to himself, especially in a place like this. The girl tilted her head slightly, studying him intently. Her luminous eyes narrowed, as if she were trying to piece together a puzzle. "Your scent," she continued, pointing at him. "It is old familiar." Jack frowned, feeling a mix of confusion and irritation. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about. I've got places to be." He started to turn away, eager to put some distance between himself and this strange encounter. But the girl wasn't done yet. "Lila," she said suddenly, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. Jack froze, his heart skipping a beat. Lila? How did she know about Lila? He turned back slowly, his expression guarded. "What do you know about Lila?" he asked, his tone sharper now. The girl hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "I remember fire, smoke, darkness." She paused, then added, "And you saved me." Jack stared at her, his mind racing. 5 years ago, he had been sent to Lila, a planet on the brink of collapse, to evacuate survivors. It had been a disaster from start to finish. Toxic storms ravaged the surface, forcing most of the population underground. During the chaos, Jack had stumbled upon a hidden lab overrun by scavengers. In the midst of the destruction, he found a young alien child hiding among the wreckage. She had been terrified, barely able to speak, but Jack had taken a risk and smuggled her aboard his ship. He dropped her off at a sanctuary station far from the danger. Never expecting to see her again, could this really be the same girl? If so, how had she tracked him down? And why now, after all these years? "I think you've got the wrong guy," Jack said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. You wanted to believe it was a coincidence, but deep down, he knew better. Girl shook her head firmly. "No mistake. I remember your scent. It is unique, unforgettable." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. This was the last thing he needed, a blast from the past showing up out of nowhere. Still, there was something about her determination that intrigued him. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, as if she truly believed he could help her. Or maybe it was the tiny flicker of guilt stirring in the back of his mind, reminding him of the choices he'd made and the lives he'd touched, long before he became the cynical man he was today. "All right," he said reluctantly. "Let's say I did save you. What do you want from me now?" The girl straightened, her glowing patterns dimming slightly, as if she were calming herself. "My name is Naira," she began, "and my world needs your help again." Jack raised an eyebrow, skepticism written all over his face. "Help? With what?" Naira glanced around, lowering her voice. "Not here. Too many ears. We must talk somewhere private." Jack hesitated, weighing his options. On one hand, he could walk away and pretend none of this had happened. On the other hand, curiosity was gnawing at him, urging him to hear her out. After a long pause, he nodded. "Fine. There's a cantina down the hall. Let's go." As they walked side by side through the bustling spaceport, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into something much bigger than himself. Whatever Nero wanted, it wasn't going to be simple or safe. But for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he found himself willing to listen.